Hi everybody. Sometimes it takes one rotten apple to infect the entire bag. In my opinion, Torben André is indeed that rotten apple. The issue is, though, that in my opinion, that rotten apple was placed in the bag on purpose. But before we get to that, I've done a few inquiries on a few very interesting things while looking into finances and the people around the king. There is another anomaly surrounding someone else in Charles's orbit, and that is Lieutenant Colonel Johnny Thompson. At the time of Queen Elizabeth's death, her senior equerry was Lieutenant Colonel Sir Anthony Charles Richards, KCVO, which stands for Knight of the Victorian Order. Because the senior equerry role is tied to internal palace administration, Richards also served as Deputy Master of the Household. Lieutenant Colonel Richards was with Queen Elizabeth since 1999, a position he held for 21 years. Lieutenant Colonel Richards was then also the lead pallbearer at the Queen's funeral. Lieutenant Colonel Tom White, a Royal Marines officer, was the Queen's, let's call him, junior equerry on a 3-year loan from the Royal Marines at the time. He later became private secretary to Catherine, Princess of Wales. That is in 2024 to be precise, and he is still her private secretary. At the time of the Queen's death, Johnny Thompson was already Charles's equerry on loan from the Royal Regiment of Scotland. Okay, so before we continue, let's just stop and break down the roles of the equerries serving the Queen and now Charles. There is the senior equerry, which is a permanent post. Then junior equerry, a rotating post. 3 years on loan from the military. And then the temporary equerries, who are blokes in the military who are called on to do certain duties, say during a state visit or some other event. Okay? At the time of the Queen's death and her funeral, her pallbearers, those who walked alongside the coffin rather than physically carry it, consisted entirely of the Queen's equerries, the senior equerry, the junior equerry, and 10 past equerries, and 2 extra equerries marching together in uniform. One of these side equerries being Johnny Thompson, who was indeed Charles's equerry on loan from the military. So at the time, Johnny was in reality still a permanent member of the armed forces, being paid by the armed forces, and whose home and health care was also subsidized by the armed forces. At the time, Johnny may very well have decided to return to his regiment when he completed his 3-year service, and I personally fully expected that he would. But Charles became king, obviously, and there Johnny was, almost a year later, assisting Charles during the coronation, and then shortly afterwards the announcement that Johnny will not return to his regiment, but instead have decided to stay on as Charles's senior and permanent equerry. Being permanent staff to the king, he will now also not be paid by the military anymore, and whatever benefits he had, or he would have had, would have to be replaced by the palace. Staff who work directly for Charles are paid by him out of his annual sovereign grant. Okay, but this is completely normal for, say, the monarch and his staff. Nothing weird, nothing out of the ordinary, except I've truly gone into past equerries, and there's absolutely nothing and nobody who is treated the way Johnny is. Charles Richards was equerry to Prince Philip before he became equerry to the Queen, and then obviously offered the job as senior equerry and deputy master of the household. Tall and handsome, but extremely dutiful, Charles Richards often blended into the background, kept to deal with the most senior of senior visitors to the palaces. It was the younger equerries, those on their 3-year rotation, whom the Queen dragged to the races, etc., etc. Charles Richards was made a Knight Commander of the Victorian Order in 2023 at the age of 70. Yet, in an interview after the ceremony, he spoke about being at Balmoral when the Queen died. It is clear he had so much respect for the Queen and cared for her deeply and loyally. But it is also clear that he always saw himself as servant to Her Majesty the Queen. He tells how Tuesday, September the 6th, was the last time he saw the Queen in the flesh. She met Liz Truss, and obviously he announced her. He saw her in and he saw her off. By late afternoon, the Queen was clearly not well, and she did not emerge from her room. As he put it, people were advised that the Queen had taken ill, and some headed up to Balmoral as soon as they were told. He told how, knowing visitors and family were on their way and that the Queen was not well, he decided to stay at Balmoral instead of returning to London. He actually told the Queen and told her that he had decided to cancel an event which was to take place in a few days in order to deal with the visitors and so on. He said the Queen gave him a broad smile Tuesday evening and said thank you before she headed upstairs, and then he did not see her again. Between the lines, one gets the feeling that those closest to the Queen, like Lieutenant Colonel Sir Charles Richards, the Queen's dresser Angela Kelly, and maybe even Sir now Baron Edward Young, the Queen's private secretary, were treated rather coldly by the family, expected to continue their duties, and that is it, no consideration for how they personally felt about the Queen. In any event, the same, however, is not true of Johnny Thompson. Johnny appears to be included even in family affairs. We see Johnny at Sandringham during Christmas, Easter church services, horse races, and other events. We even saw him in the United States with Charles and Camilla. For a while, he must have stepped back a little, and we did see the junior equerry with Charles, which would indeed be the norm, as the senior equerry has to see to household schedules and serious matters. But it did not take long before Johnny was back, sitting or standing behind Charles wherever he goes, holding his coat for him. Anyway, this permanent presence, but unlike Sir Charles Richards, who took a step back and who strictly executed his duties, Johnny appears relaxed, chatting to security detail or other staff and family members alike. A couple of days ago, we even observed the interaction between Johnny and Lady Louise, Johnny and Duchess Sophie, and even Prince Edward. And I can sincerely tell you, I have never seen this much familiarity between an equerry or then any other member of staff in public, as I have seen with Johnny and members of the royal family. At least, like I said, not in public. It is sometimes hard to figure out why Johnny is actually attending certain events. For example, I saw him at a garden party, socializing, not behind the king, but steps away. I have seen him joking with someone in the press pack. How many of you actually know that Johnny was also the Queen's favourite bodyguard when she was in Scotland for a couple of years? Yes, indeed. Regardless of Johnny's familiarity and treatment, or shall I say special treatment, from the royals, no one is even complaining. There's not even any kind of professional jealousy, nothing. Now, I did a short video on Johnny a year or two ago, and a couple of months ago I mentioned him again to one of my contributors, and he told me that he has not heard one bad word about Johnny. Whoever you talk to will tell you what a fine guy he is, what a brilliant sense of humor he has, his sportsmanship, how much of a team player he is, etc., etc. It goes on and on and on. However, like my contributor says, don't think you can get any other information on Lieutenant Colonel Johnny or get any closer to Lieutenant Colonel Johnny. 3 years ago, while he was just an equerry, we saw that he lived in Surrey with his wife of 13 years, and they had a 4-year-old son, a son who should now be about 7, same as Archie, more or less the same age. We also know that since the last articles on Johnny were published in 2023, he got divorced, engaged, and remarried. He is currently married to Olivia Lewis, who also worked for Charles and Camilla at some point, and whose father was communications secretary to Queen Elizabeth II. More than that, no one knows. His old employment records listed his parents as Mr. and Mrs. Alan Thompson of Morpeth, Northumberland, and nothing else. No siblings are listed, nothing. Just a rather mysterious bloke, a jovial guy who keeps everything about his past a secret. I still, after major digging, feel that there is something different about Lieutenant Colonel Thompson. But what? Why are the royals so fond of him? And why does Charles prefer him above any of his other staff? So while asking that and knowing that even Prince William has no issue with Johnny, except that he would have advised Johnny to return to the military and continue building his career, and that for numerous reasons, one being that William cannot guarantee him a job after Charles's death. Well, as much as William accepts Johnny, as little he likes Torben André. William had issues and has a dislike of Torben André and his colleague Amanda Patel long before André came to work for Charles. While Torben André managed the features desk and then became top editor for the female section regularly published very critical pieces on Catherine, targeting her mercilessly. It was Amanda Patel who came up with the Waity Katie moniker and who wrote many derogatory columns under Torben André's oversight. One in particular which angered William badly, in which Catherine was labelled a grasping woman and which appeared under Torben André's direction in May 2010. To this day, William cannot understand why his father would choose Torben André as his Secretary of Communications. And believe you me, those who are close and somewhat close to William won't hesitate to tell you that he still does not like the man and would still like to kick his butt out of the palace. William is also not the only one. A number of royal insiders would want to see the back of him, and the sooner the better. My contributor tells me that André is neither liked nor trusted among senior courtiers and those close to Charles and Camilla. One of the first things which really shocked royal insiders was when André suggested or agreed to meet with Harry's representatives at the Royal Overseas League on a darn open balcony, allowing a US photographer to photograph them and spread the photographs all over the pages of the Mail on Sunday. Now, whether it was André's decision to hold the meeting on the balcony or whether he agreed to it, anyone and everyone said that it was incredibly sloppy for a supposed seasoned media man. OMG. And then before the balcony saga, there was the disastrous leaks of Charles's funeral blueprints and stories about Harry and Meghan having a central role in the proceedings. And what did Torben André do? Rather than quietly managing the narrative and issuing a standard controlled rebuttal, André had an incredibly tense meltdown, and the aggressive confrontation, his private messages and threats to the royal rota became an entire story on its own. There are currently many courtiers and critics arguing and saying that Torben André's aggressive old-school tabloid tactics are constantly backfiring, transforming behind-the-scenes palace management into public media spectacles. Now, isn't that exactly what I said? Didn't I say numerous times that the royals are becoming a daytime soap opera? With Torben André at the helm of media relations and Meghan Markle with her Instagram pages, how can we expect anything else? It is as tacky as it can get. Yet, complaints and efforts to point all of this out to Charles has fallen on deaf ears. Like my contributor said, Torben André is fast becoming King Charles's Michael Fawcett Mach 2, and it is likely to run into the same kind of disaster. Torben André will slavishly, I don't even know whether there's such a word, but let's say, slavishly follow Charles's instructions, and the day it backfires, Charles will throw him under the bus, just like he did with Michael. Although I hear Charles is still seeing Michael in private. Okay, there is that. But that is a discussion for another day. Anyway, back to William for a minute. When it comes to Torben André, William blames Camilla. I'm not going to go all the way back to 2005 and beyond, But there was a time when Torben Andre, as co-deputy editor of the Daily Mail, was one of those Camilla and her camp formed close alliances with in order to rehabilitate her image. So let's just say that appointing Andre was Camilla's choice, and in exchange his brief was to fiercely protect and manage Camilla's narrative as she transitioned into her role as queen. So, although we cannot tell what William is saying to his staff and confidants, it is well known that he is highly irritable and angry about the addition of Andre to his father's staff, and highly unlikely that Andre will remain employed by the royal family once William becomes king. Torben Andre will have to go do what so many other journalists did after losing their jobs or retiring, and that is to write a book. Good luck with that, Scobie. Andre. Same thing. Maybe others will, but I personally won't buy your book. Okay? Okay, guys, that's it from me for today. Please take good care of yourselves, stay vigilant, and stay safe. Bye.